All right. Well, good morning, and we'll give a moment here as this fires up. Welcome to another Account-Based Friday. We've got a great guest today, a sales and revenue and really a commercial transformation expert, Brian Shea. I had met Brian a while back when he ran sales effectiveness and operations side of selling for Three Pillar Global, and now at CMG, he's really responsible for commercial transformation of the sales function. And we're going to dig in deeply to a couple of things that he's looking at in terms of intent and sales and marketing alignment. But before we get there, each week we start off with a poll, which I'll bring up here shortly. And this week's poll, we talk about SDRs. And one of my motivations, people are in the planning process right now for budgets for 2023. And one of the challenges that people are having is really sales optimization, marketing optimization, and effectiveness. And I was curious what that meant to the SDR function. I've said it before, and I could keep repeating it, that I feel like the SDR function is the most valuable function in the organization. It's the Achilles heel between sales and marketing. I think it's the toughest job on planet Earth because of what that team and what you have to go through to get people on the phone and gathering insights. It's just a hard job. You have to be like an expert at sales and an expert at marketing. And it's very difficult typically because it's a younger person that's in that role. It may not have business context. But anyway, I asked this question of what should people be looking for in 2023. We just asked this morning, so we don't have a ton of responses, but by and large, people are at least responding that they are going to be making more investment. So I was pleasantly surprised, but a good percentage were also saying less investment or staying the same. I don't know, Megan, did you have any point of view on this particular poll?
Yep. Well, I'm in the no change camp. We're sort of keeping what we have, but I can see, given the market softening that a lot of companies are experiencing, I can see saying we need more people doing outreach to get us the opportunities that we need to fill our pipeline. And especially at the start of the year, I know I'm really focused on thinking about how do we do all we can to aggressively source new leads and pipeline for the first half of the year so that it's got the runway it needs to close by the end of the year. So, and I can see companies saying, SDR investment is a smart place to be. But I'm curious, Brian, to get your point of view on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Megan, and happy holiday season to everyone. I think the question is around more or less SDR investment. There are a number of plays that need to be run kind of earlier in cycle. So when thinking about your go-to-market, are companies that are going to de-emphasize investment in SDRs, are they going to change the plays for their direct sellers? Meaning that all of those kind of early plays that get run around, like identification of need, early intent signals, and the such, are those now going to be handed over to your direct selling team? Because there's jobs to be done there, right? So I think there's another question underneath that. If you're going to de-emphasize the investment in SDR, then where do those jobs go? Is it automation? Is it marketing? Is it to your AEs or your commercial sellers?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. And, I think, Brian, we were even talking about a recent article here. And let me see if I can pull up the article that was kind of predicting what's happening to sales in 2023. And we were talking a lot about intent data as being part of that. Let me pull up the article here. Where the heck is it here? Big ideas that shape sales in 2023. And here it is. Let me scroll back up here. And we were talking about the concept. I'll drop this in the notes as well. But we're talking about the concept of one of those big ideas being intent data. I'm going to scroll down to that idea here. I think it was idea number 3. Buyer intent will become a strategic input in 2023. What are you seeing in terms of your transformation clients or your own experience in and around intent, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I love seeing this as one of the big ideas because I think intent is in whatever platform you're using needs to be absolutely part of the required recipe. And I get there, John, through if we look at the data of how buyers are buying today, right? COVID changed all the rules for both sellers and buyers. 79% of buyers, based upon a recent buyer preference study from Korn Ferry, 79% of buyers are waiting to have their solution fully formed in their minds before ever engaging a seller. So nearly 80% of your marketplace is doing the job without talking to your team. But while they're doing that job in formulating what they believe is their need, they're kicking off signals. They're doing research in the market, right? They're attending webinars, they're going to conferences, virtual conferences, actual conferences, et cetera. And it's all of that exhaust that comes out of those activities that these intent platforms are picking up. So in the absence of having an intent platform to listen for those signals, I think the challenge for B2B sales organizations is by the time they see the signal from the buyer, it's way down market, downstream. And if that comes in a form fill or something like that, you're more than likely being pressed to beat a competitor on price, another competitor that got there earlier to help shape and educate the buyers. And so your value, your differentiation strategy with your go-to-market now gets reduced to commoditization selling, and nobody wants to be in that position. So I think this is, I was really excited to see this as one of the big ideas. How about you, Meg?
Yeah, I was just having a conversation about how we might be deploying intent in our own go-to-market organization. And I think you're right. The trick to me is knowing what people look for at what stage of evaluation, right? So the things that I'm looking at when I'm first exploring, do I need this solution, or do I have this challenge? How should I solve for it? Those things are going to be earlier. And that's when you really want to be in speaking with that buyer, because you can help them as a real resource and shape their decision making, right? As opposed to if it's at the end and they're looking up your solution versus somebody else's, to your point exactly, Brian, at that point, they've been advised by somebody about what to do. Unfortunately, if you weren't that person, your odds of winning late in the game are pretty low. So knowing the way that your buyers think and what kinds of things they're going to be looking for at different stages of evaluation, at different stages of problem solving, becomes a way to make intent actually a strategic advantage. You want to be able to read their mind based on what they're doing. And if you can sort of get in place and really understand what those signals, that exhaust, should look like when they're starting the journey versus when they're towards the end, I think that can also help your sellers be more effective in their outreach and help your marketers be more effective in their outreach to really meet those buyers where they are, but also hopefully find them early enough to be, truly on the road with them, as opposed to helping them at the very end. And as you say, commoditized buying situations are never good. Doesn't help anybody. But yes, I'm there. And I'm curious though, maybe John, what are you seeing from your clients in terms of how they're deploying intent resources?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we might dive a little bit more deeply into intent in 2023, because I think it's becoming a more and more relevant topic right now. We're seeing multiple forms of intent, so multiple providers, but people are really having a difficult time operationalizing the intent, especially at the sales, at the AE, or at the BDR level. So simplifying whatever that intent looks like to that function becomes very important. It's definitely a critical ingredient. It's not always a silver bullet. We're also finding that there's different flavors of intent: first, second, third party, account, contact. Like there's a whole matrix. I think I've got a blog on it somewhere. But what we've noticed with account level intent is it does require validation. So somebody's got to pick up the phone and actually talk with, or do research to figure out, is this account really in market for the opportunity or not? There can be some false positives. There can be information that's not quite accurate in a percentage of time. So by that validation, really what intent represents at the account level is prioritized inbound or prioritized accounts, and nothing more than that. Prioritized outbound, I guess, would be a better way of saying it. That requires some level of validation and then some level of follow-up. It's not necessarily that silver bullet, but it does help. And in this environment right now, where, as Brian said, speed is everything, intent may matter here. So it becomes extremely relevant. One other thing that popped up in this article, and I'm going to pull another idea up, and I'd be curious about your point of view on kind of the sales and marketing alignment side of things. Brian, is from a marketer perspective, we always talk about, oh, those damn salespeople, they're blasting their entire database with SalesLoft or Outreach, and they're damaging our brand. And but at the same time, marketers do that. They just don't see it that way. They may be doing it with their marketing automation system and blasting out. But in this environment, as LinkedIn points out, they're talking about unwelcomed outreach. And I'd be curious, like, are you seeing anything here either on this specific topic or maybe the alignment of sales and marketing as to how to do that outreach as part of a 2023 go-to-market strategy?
Well, I have a perspective. I don't know that I have the whole answer, John, but I think what's critical is that an organization's sales function in leadership and marketing leadership have got to be absolutely aligned at the hip. We always talk about sales marketing alignment, right? We've been talking about it for years. But I think in terms of understanding the plays, in terms of who does what, more of that is becoming dependent on having really clear swim lanes, rules of engagement per se, and partnership between sales and marketing. And sales operations enablement kind of can play matchmaker, referee, sales technologist, that sits in the middle. But it really becomes a collaborative roadmap for the what are the plays that organizations should be running. I think that stat around unwelcomed outreach is and I think it ties back into intent for a moment, right? It is without understanding where an accounts are with the signals that they're kicking off for research, right? You cannot begin to kind of craft a hypothesis to say, well, should my plays that I'm running be built around this account appears to be in still identifying need, or are they around evaluating solutions at this point, right? Where in their buyer stage are they? Because all of the outreach, right, for it to be welcomed, it has to kind of match where buyers are in their journey. But the second piece is, ironically, going back to the Korn Ferry study, the majority of buyers will engage with sellers earlier if they bring insights, value, perspective, and help them think about how to make a purchasing decision. Right, that's a whole lot different than just kind of launching spam campaigns on buyers, right, which can damage your brand. Be the solution provider in the room that can kind of raise your hand and say, wait, we think about this differently. These are a couple of questions that we like to engage with our customers. Can we schedule time to go through those questions, right? Buyers are looking for somebody who's different, that can help them either validate what their teams have assembled in terms of information, or B, help them kind of dig through this big, massive pile of information that they've received. Gartner earlier this year in one of their CSO studies talked about buyer paralysis because there's so much information that now decision makers are getting, right? They're saying, well, I have to improve my business and I have to have all this information. I have all this information, but I'm not sure how to think about it. Right. So there's another on-ramp for high quality value-based messaging to say, we're experts at helping you kind of think through the pile of information. So I think those are if John, you and I go back several years, I always tend to look at buyer related and buying insights through a number of studies to really start understanding like what's important to buyers. Like, how are they thinking about this, and what's the right on-ramp for our sales teams to have, so that we can add value. We can be servant sellers, not just, trying to drop on the latest, company spam or one page or whatever other collateral that I think winds up polluting brands. What do you see on your side, Meg?
Excuse me. I agree with you. I think, really focusing on what does your customer need in this moment and how can you help them get it is always the right way to think about things. One thing that stood out to me in the LinkedIn article, the mention of, sellers who spend relatively less time just blasting stuff out and more time really thinking about what is the best way to engage with this customer, end up performing better. That to me is a truth, but it's interesting to me how resistant a lot of sales organizations are to that reality. And I'd love to get your point of view on, how do you help? I think people feel like, spending too much time doing research on your buyer and too much time kind of getting background is worse than, or spending time on preparation is not as valuable as spending time actually doing. But I would argue that that's not the case. And I think that's what this is saying. How do you get sellers to appreciate that? Like, what are some ways that you can sort of prove that this is the right way to go about it? Spending more time knowing your buyer will actually yield a better outcome than spending more time just trying to engage based on not having that knowledge.
So good sellers, as I refer to them, are high performing sellers. Already know this. This is what they do. But they're often the ones that can be identified as being the lucky ones, right? That got the good lead, that they were just in the right place at the right time. But in fact, they just take the field differently, right? They understand that investing in research is a way to craft the right conversation with the buyer for where they are at that point in time. I think you're spot on. I think for the other that middle kind of 80% of sellers, right, is what are sales leaders stating is the metric, right? What are they holding their teams accountable for? If they're holding their teams accountable for velocity or volume of output, messages, calls, whatever it is, well, then you're going to get high volumes of messages and calls that aren't connecting with buyers, because what you didn't create your KPIs around is around connection, right? Around engagement, around getting a second meeting, not a first meeting, right? And so I think as a community of sales leaders, we can be more thoughtful in what we want to measure in terms of success of the activity of our sellers, because it's if we merely just look at volume, then the answer is we go to an outreach or one of those and we just fill it full of irrelevant messaging, and then we pull the handle and blast.
Yeah, I hear you. And Nigel, I think your point's well taken. Thanks for throwing out that in there. Convincing sales leadership that research is really an important and valuable and impactful part of the process. I totally agree. And actually, I'm interested, Brian, to know one of the things we were talking about earlier in the conversation was a healthy sales and marketing relationship. What to you are the hallmarks of saying this is a healthy and constructive relationship between the leaders of those functions and just those functions in general? What do you look to have in that?
So I think the first, there's a lot to it. There's personalities involved as well. Yes. And there's also culture of the organization. But I think that there needs to be an alignment that says, okay, do we agree that we want to be a buyer-centric organization, right? It sounds very foundational, right? But do we believe that our motion should be built with the buyer and the buyers being the first kind of gate that we go through? And if so, then therefore buyer journeys and buyer stages and all the things, Meg, that you and I were just talking about all kind of come on stage, which is, okay, if true, then what do we do at each of these stages based upon these signals? But they're very buyer-centric, which requires, I think, to Nigel's point, is that's where, well, how do we get to personalized, relevant messaging? Well, research becomes a critical component. So therefore, research then becomes one of those dependencies for the plays that we run. The other piece about marketing and sales for the alignment is there's also, how is the organization holding the commercial organization consistently accountable to the metrics, KPIs, et cetera? Do they all have an alignment, right? Or is sales off, they're chasing this, well, we just need to get a whole bunch of meetings, and marketing is over here with, well, we just have to generate a whole bunch of something. Well, how do those two things work together, right? Or do they are these the two poles of the magnet, right? That are pushing each other away. And so holistically in building go-to-market, it should be clear to the leadership team that you can see a really bright line that's based around all of those touch points of when and how we want to engage with our ideal customer profile around each of these stages. And there should be really clear and deliberate plays that happen at each of those stages where marketing and sales are complementing each other, right? There's really clear handoffs at each of those stages so that we can measure our effectiveness as a commercial organization versus sales didn't do enough of these or marketing didn't do enough of those. So in a really short, a very complex topic, that's one of the quick ways to get started is do we all have clear eyes on what the North Star is?
Yeah, I would just add one quick thing there. And I noticed this in talking with a bunch of different companies over 10 years, just in your, going back to your former company and your relationship with the head of marketing there, the level of collaboration that the two of you had, it always seemed like you were checking in with one another. And what we noticed, kind of as a vendor coming into your organization was you guys were unbelievably tied at the hip in terms of the coordination, and it's rare. And I'm not trying to blow smoke. It's what we observe in a lot of other companies where there's a disconnect between sales and marketing. They verbally say that they're connected, but the actions don't necessarily line up like they did with what we saw with you and your head of marketing. I'm curious, from a relationship perspective, because you had talked about that before, are there any tips or tricks or ideas to kind of get that relationship working even better beyond what you've already shared? I mean, you've shared a great deal, but this is really hitting home on that whole sales and marketing leadership alignment and kind of seeing it the same way.
So, John, she is a terrific partner, and where we first kicked off kind of our relationship several years ago was for me to gain an understanding of how do they measure success inside of her organization. And the success in marketing is, way up top of funnel, right? So we were able to start building out what does success look like in pre-funnel, early stage funnel, mid-market, mid-funnel, end of funnel, and create collaborative plays that work together so that you could see sales operations and marketing working together at this top of the funnel or above the funnel. And then when we had activity that came into the funnel, you saw a different set of coordinated plays. So it was the orchestration, I think, that you may be referring to is really us being deliberate and mapping out what has to happen, right? So when we talked about these handoffs between sales and marketing or marketing and sales and having SDR, BDRs in the middle of that, it was really deliberate to say at this stage, what happens, who does it, how do we measure it? And that took, that was a very time consuming, ongoing investment between us, because what we had to both be open to is we're here for the collective, right? We both play a role. It's not about marketing metrics or sales metrics, but it's actually about, driving for new deals, right? It's about closing opportunities and what has to happen for us to be successful, right? In that journey. So there was a lot that went into it, but having those individuals at the table during pre-year planning and mapping out what the agreements are was all part of our kind of governance model.
Yeah, that's great. I think that collaborative planning is so critical. If you start out on the same page, it takes work to get off of the same page. But if you start out on the wrong, not understanding each other or being out of sync, it's that much harder to fix after you've already put things in motion and people are upset and frustrated and all that stuff. So it's I think that's super, super good advice. I'm just curious, we're hearing a lot of things that are going to be challenging going into 2023. But I was struck by there's an issue of New York Magazine every year called Reasons to Love New York. And it occurred to me that, kind of like you can have a love-hate relationship with a city. You can have a love-hate relationship with a year. And I'm curious to know what things people are excited about for 2023 versus what they're worried about. We're hearing a lot about the worries, but I'm curious to know, Brian, what's something that you're looking forward to trying or something you think is going to be different and better in 2023 as we look ahead to the next year?
So, and I always look forward. Every challenge is an opportunity. And John and I were talking earlier that that we both remember the last time that the economy melted down and we were never going to be able to sell anything ever again, which is around the 2010, 2011. Right? These are cyclical, right? And so we learn from certainly from what's happened in the past. I think in 2023, successful organizations will be data and research driven from a sales marketing standpoint. I think they will realize that that as buyers are becoming younger, digital buying is now becoming more and more prevalent. So therefore, how are you changing your playbook, right, to be able to adapt to these different myriad of buyers? And the younger the buyers are, the further they will go in cycle without talking to you. And they're going to look for a digital channel, right? So do you have a digital channel or digital channels in which to engage with the marketplace? And B, if and when they raise their hand during that journey, how do you run those plays going forward? The alignment inside of the organization between sales marketing, sales operations, enablement, all of these functions, whatever the companies call them, they've got to be at the table together to say what happens at each of these stages that that we are seeing the signals coming from buyers. So I think the really smart companies will embrace intent. They'll have plays that will kind of run the arc across the early identification of need all the way over to the kind of reconciliation, negotiating kind of plays that buyers will have. I think that there's another 2023 thing that I'm very excited about in my vocation, which is starting to see enablement platforms come together rather than point solutions. So it's also making the technology easier to embed into organizations. I don't have to buy 10 different point solutions. I can buy 2 platforms or 3 platforms or whatever, and they're becoming more homogenous. But I think 2023 will separate those organizations that really have a focus on customer centricity, right, on customers. And they'll do a better job expanding their relationships with existing customers to drive more of their revenue. And I think that will also pay dividends in how they're effective at landing net new logos.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly on that because we're hitting the bottom of the hour here and probably just about to wrap up. Thinking back, 2 decades ago in Silicon Valley, when I was based in Silicon Valley, in 2000, 2001, we went through the same kind of wipeout as 2008 out in the East Coast. And there was literally, like, you could see tumbleweed going across 101 in terms of the number of companies that were letting people go. But if you think back to what was happening then, it was almost like a fire that went through and burned everything to the ground, and a lot of new growth started. And although Salesforce.com was one of those companies, started probably around the 96, 97 time period, they not only did they thrive and survive through that time period, but they've accelerated. And now look at their size. Another company that comes to mind, not a household name, but over $1 billion in revenue, would be a company called Equinix that went through something very, very similar that was starting up in that same time period. I think if you go back to Facebook, Google was around pre-2000, 2001, as was Yahoo, because my old company did a lot of their hosting of their network. But at the time, it was just a really rough time because people couldn't find work. They couldn't find jobs for a period of time. And then all of a sudden, all these companies grew out of nothing. And so maybe this is a rebirth period too, where we've just gone through really, really heady times, just like 1999 and dot-com implosion, where it was really, really heady. We kind of saw that at the beginning of this year, the first 3 quarters of the year. And now we're in that time period where it's not heady. And so that focus on customer and the focus on the upsell, cross-sell becomes really, really important. But at the same time, growth will eventually come back, I think, or I hope. I don't know at what point in time it'll come back, but it may birth some new ideas that none of us have even thought of. So I'm hopeful for that in 2023, and I'm hoping it's sooner rather than later. But just wrapping up here, I know we're a couple minutes over time. Brian, any closing thoughts, or you too, Megan, any closing thoughts from this week?
John, sales is hard, and right now it's just a little harder. But sales has always been hard, right? And so I think it is all the things that we've talked about today. And Meg, I will hand over the microphone to you. How do you see 2023 playing out for success in your world?
Yeah, I'm very happy about 2023. I think there's so much potential. I think, for me, we've laid a lot of foundational elements that now we get to build upon, in my organization. So I'm really feeling good about that. And I'm really feeling good about the quality of the customer relationships that we have, because I think that's the thing that often sustains you through challenging times. So I'm excited about that too. But I am also thankful that you joined us today, Brian. It was great to hear your points of view, and we always appreciate folks who really are champions of that sales and marketing relationship. So thanks for sharing your wisdom around that. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and happy holidays to everyone.
Absolutely. Next week, we've got Jill Raleigh. She's a partner at Stage 2. She'll be talking on partners and partnerships and the importance of another channel of distribution and reaching out to prospective clients through your partner channel. So super excited. Brian, thanks again for joining us. And yeah, happy holidays. Jill will be wrapping us up for the year, and then we'll start fresh in 2023. So thank you.